Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to Ramacrow. It's time for another voicemail. Today's voicemail is from an anonymous caller. Let's listen to what they have to say.
Hi, Lloyd. I would like to remain anonymous, but you are welcome to use this recording for any broadcasting or anything. I am a Jehovah's Witness. I was raised a Jehovah's Witness, and I still continue to be one. I thought I would leave a voicemail just to kind of give a different perspective than a lot of people do on your channel. I find a lot of the people who are very upset and harmed by the governing body and like the organization as a whole were at one times very fervent and very strict Jehovah's Witnesses. I have always been and kind of was raised by Jack Jehovah's Witnesses, or maybe some of them are true believers or whatever, but I definitely feel the energy of like my family who are witnesses and who aren't, and there's a lot of different variations of activity that people do in my family. The common theme is we're kind of Catholic Jehovah's Witnesses. It's kind of like, this is our family heritage and this is like our history and our culture and our family. But I don't at least personally feel that there was an excess amount of like pressure or kind of fear mongering put on me as a child, like that like the end is coming, or that there wasn't a lot of like sexual repression. Obviously there was still like biblical standards, but I think it would be more comparable to like being raised in a born again home or like a Catholic home where people went to church regularly, more than being raised in like what I hear a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses say. I've never really experienced that, but I obviously know that other people have, and other people have been severely harmed by that. So I'm not saying, I'm not trying to excuse the organization or anything. Like that's just kind of my perspective of things. Anyway, what I kind of wanted to bring up was from, growing up in it and seeing different generations. And I think the area that I grew up in particular, is different than a lot of other areas. We're not close to a Bethel, or we're not close to any of these things. And there's a lot of different people, and there's a huge group of Jehovah's Witnesses in the area, and a lot of people that are loosely kind of associated. And so shunning doesn't necessarily play a factor as much. I have many friends that have left who are inactive and disfellowshipped that I still talk to. People are like aware of that and don't have an issue with that. There's not this big, pressure put on it in the same way. But anyway, I think that what I've seen, a lot of people of my generation, which I'm not going to divulge my age just because like I'm not trying to get heat on me, but I am definitely closer to middle-aged than teenager. And people of my generation, I think, were more people were raised in this like strict upbringing environment of, fire and doomstone. And the result was that they left, and they were very angry at the religion and all this stuff because they weren't allowed to go to school, or because they were encouraged to get married really young and all this stuff. What I see of the younger generation now of Jehovah's Witnesses kind of coming up that are currently maybe late teens, early 20s, is they do view things more of like in the perspective of kind of born again kids, like church kids, like, oh, like, I don't know, they're still religious. They still have like religious standards, but they're not as focused on a lot of the like rhetoric that comes out of the organization. So anyway, this is like going on, and I need to stop. But my point would just be, I think it's kind of interesting to see the newer generation and see where the direction of the organization may be going. Instead of it just exploding, it may be going towards that more like apathetic, normal religious kind of thing. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you for that message. And viewers may be interested to know that there was a follow-up message. I don't tend to play double messages. Sometimes I even get 3 or 4 messages from the same individual. And as a rule, I don't play ever more than one message in a single voicemail video. On this occasion, I'm willing to make an exception because we have someone calling in who is identifying as an existing Jehovah's Witness. So I thought you might want to hear the follow-up message.
Okay, I just sent you a voicemail. I would like to remain anonymous, but you are welcome to broadcast this as well. I am just wondering if you've ever talked about or kind of researched the swinger element of Jehovah's Witnesses. There are, at least in the United States, there are a lot of kind of strange pockets of groups of people that engage in swinging and kind of like underground swinger clubs and all this stuff that are obviously not encouraged or sanctioned by the organization, but they're very popular and often seems to happen with like couples who are very, very devout, got married very young, and then they like all hang out together and go on vacation and do kind of strange things. And it often involves elders and ministerial servants, kind of like the young golden boy people. So anyway, I just thought that is kind of an interesting like social study and wondering if you've heard of this or if you've ever touched on it. Thank you.
Okay. So again, I'm a little bit speechless. This is not a message I was expecting. Certainly the follow-up message. Maybe I need to go on Google and Google swinger elements Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm sure there's going to be some interesting results coming up. Look, I think if I were to boil down and condense both messages, and I hate putting words in anyone's mouth. I hate it when people put words in my mouth. And so I certainly don't want to put words in your mouth. So I'll do my best to be as fair as possible. But I think what you're doing is you're saying, okay, lots of people who watch your channel, and indeed you yourself, have had negative experiences with Jehovah's Witnesses, but I don't identify so much with that. I've had a far more liberal upbringing where the religion isn't taken so seriously, and as a consequence, I'm not quite as, how did you put it, upset and harmed, and you also said angry at the organization. So I don't feel the same way. I think this is more or less what you're saying. You're saying you don't feel the same way as myself and other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses because you are used to a more liberal, more tolerant, more decadent brand of Jehovah's Witness. And look, it may surprise you to know that there's absolutely nothing surprising in what you've said. I know that there are Jehovah's Witnesses who don't take the religion seriously. I just don't personally, and I know you're not saying this, but I don't see that that has anything whatsoever to do with the religion that Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to follow, because ultimately that's all that really matters if I'm going to make videos about Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, sure, it's interesting that you can have different families, different communities, different congregations, where they do things slightly differently, where they have swingers. That's interesting and, to be honest, completely predictable. it goes against the narrative of what the governing body would have us believe, because they would have us believe that it's the same absolutely everywhere. And, you know, wherever you set foot around the world, everyone's worshipping in the same way. And anyone who's done any amount of traveling, even in the same part of the world, will know that a Jehovah's Witness in one part of the world won't have exactly the same experience in terms of, you know, the strictness of the teachings as Jehovah's Witnesses in other parts of the world. That only proves, as far as I'm concerned, that it's a man-made, mundane religious organization. It's exactly what you would expect in an organization that isn't being led by God, and that's just the same as any other religion, where people say one thing and do another. What you're describing is people living a double life. We actually had a word for, or a name for people who did this. I remember when I used to go to the conventions at the Manchester, what was then called the Manchester Evening News Arena. Maybe it's still called that. Before that, it was called 9X back in the day. But it was a typical kind of sports arena, still is, where they play basketball and that sort of thing, in like an oval shape. And what you always used to notice, if you ever needed to go to the toilet during the sessions, during the talks, or if in my case you were on the chairman's office and you needed to direct speakers to and from the platform, and you ventured out onto the concourse that ran around the arena, is you would always notice people just hanging around, you know, chatting, having a bit of a chin wag, you know, while the talks were in progress. Sometimes it was maybe a mother or a father with a pushchair, and that's totally understandable. But other times, you know, you would see witnesses, Jehovah's Witnesses, in name at least, who were at the convention, but not really at the convention. They were finding any excuse to do stuff outside of where the talk, where the spiritual food was being dispensed. And we used to call them moons, because they orbited the organization, and in a very literal sense, they orbited the convention, because they were literally kind of shuffling around the concourse, finding excuses to do anything but listen to the talks. It's a universal experience, I'm afraid, in the Jehovah's Witness religion. And I know you're not saying this. I guess what I'm about to say now applies not so much to you, but to anyone who watches my channel who might think that I'm exaggerating, or I'm mischaracterizing how evil and corrupt the organization is with this, oh, well, that's not my experience thing. You know, I don't personally shun. My family doesn't shun people. I know about swingers. I know about underground swingers communities. You know, my personal experience is different. Fantastic. Great. But again, I can only go off what the actual religion teaches. And you said almost straight away in your, I think the first part of your two messages, what I hear a lot of other Jehovah's Witnesses or ex-Jehovah's Witnesses say is, and this isn't about what I'm saying, this isn't about what ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are saying per se. If you follow my channel and are remotely familiar with my content, you'll know that I'm basing everything I say when I'm commenting on the religion and its teachings on what's actually coming from the lips of the leaders themselves. You know, I'm literally showing video footage of David Splain saying you should all remember to shun each other, or Tony Morris or Stephen Lett giving some kind of judgmental doomsday talk. That's honesty. That's keeping it real. That's saying, here's what the religion teaches. You know, if we're going to make videos based on the version of Jehovah's Witnesses that's followed by these underground swinger communities, I'm sure there would be an audience for that, by the way. I'm sure lots of people would tune in. But those wouldn't be Jehovah's Witness videos, would they? Realistically. All we'd be talking about would be people who are living double lives. People who are, to be completely blunt, hypocrites. Especially if they're elders. You know, if you have an elder who's also a swinger, and he is not only getting on the platform and preaching against sexual immorality, but also presiding over judicial committees where he is arranging for people to be shunned, for families to be torn apart based on rules that he is breaking on a whim. That's outrageous hypocrisy. So I don't doubt that there are double lives, and not just double lives, but I don't doubt that there are more liberal interpretations of the Jehovah's Witness religion depending on which part of the world you go to. Another example I can give you, if you watch the film Apostasy, there's a scene where there's this party going on and they're dancing to dance music at this party. And I remember hearing at the time people saying, well, that wouldn't happen. You know, that's not my experience of Jehovah's Witnesses. We didn't used to go to parties like that where there was worldly music. Well, that was my experience. And bear in mind, Daniel Cockatilo, who directed that film, comes from the same part of the world that I come from Manchester. And that was what the culture was like, or maybe still is like. So there was always some reason for there to be get-togethers, and you could bet that there would be some kind of dancing, including to music that was a little bit risky from a Jehovah's Witness point of view. You would have weddings that got a bit raucous. You would have get-togethers that got a bit raucous. There were always situations where you're, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I'm not supposed to be enjoying myself here, or I should be shocked and offended by what I'm seeing. But you were able to justify it. That's human. That's called cognitive dissonance. You know, not everything is as straight-laced as the governing body portray, but that doesn't mean that that's not what they expect. And the expectations that are placed on people, especially young people, can be crushing, can be devastating, have driven some to suicide. So we're not just talking about a few people who are upset. And we're not just talking about a few people who are angry. Yes, there is anger, but as I've said before on this channel, it's justified because this is an abusive and cruel organization. And while there will always be hypocrites and people who live double lives and people who, quite frankly, are just trying to get by, they might be not necessarily hypocrites per se, but just going along with it to make their families happy so that they don't get shunned. Yes, you will always have a spectrum when it comes to how seriously people take the religion, but that doesn't alter the nature and the essence of the religion itself. And that's what I comment on this channel. And when people talk about the harm they've experienced as a result of what's coming out of the lips of the leaders, as I'm showing on the screen, we should listen. And we should take note. And people need to know that this is not an organization to entertain in any way, shape, or form. Not something you want to be getting involved in or toying with, because it does very real harm in people's lives. So I don't want to come across like I'm biting your head off. You sound like a really nice lady. You sound like you left your message with the best of intentions. Again, as you put it, just leaving another perspective. And so I guess a lot of what I've said in response has just been aimed not at you, but at those who use similar reasoning to you to dismiss essentially ex-Jehovah's Witness activism. So don't feel like I've chewed your head off because I'm not interested in doing that. I think it's great that your experience hasn't been harmful and hasn't screwed you up, quite frankly. But hopefully you can understand, or hopefully I've shared a little bit more from my perspective, why we do need to hear from people who are upset and harmed, and why the fact that people live double lives and are hypocrites in any religion shouldn't inform us necessarily that the religion itself is okay or mostly benign, because I think you would recognize that logic doesn't hold up. Anyway, I hope you found my thoughts useful. Don't forget that if you'd like to leave a voicemail, the thing to do is go to speakpipe.com/Cedars, remembering to indicate clearly if you don't want me to broadcast your message on this channel. But that's all I have time for. Thanks so much for watching.